views and opinions expressed on Xplorers Secrets of the Truth or that of their guests or contributors are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All information on Xplorers Secrets of the Truth is provided in good faith. However, we make no representation or warranty of any kind, express or implied, regarding the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, availability, or completeness of any information on this talk show or website.
From monsters and ghosts to otherworldly beings, join the explorers as they venture into the darkest realms, seeking the truth till it goes bump in the night.
Welcome back to Explorers Dead Air, the show where we follow strange signals, dead legends, and untraceable things that still cast a shadow. The show digs into the stories no one else will touch, and occasionally ends up covered in cryptid goo.
That happened one time, Chad. One time. And I still don't know what that goo was. It's kind of gross.
Well, today we're going to go halfway across the world to the jungles of Sri Lanka, home of a cryptid most people haven't heard of.
Mm-hmm.
But they should have. The Nittaewo. Now, the etymology of the word may derive from Indo-Aryan words to describe the more primitive tribes that were encountered in India, or a second possible etymology is from the Senegalese for the one who possesses nails.
That is right. And to give a description, they are small, hairy, human-like creatures said to be just 3 to 4 feet tall, with long claws, zero chill. The females are reported to be even smaller. They're covered in hair, often said to be reddish in color, which is kind of stereotypical with these hairy hominids. With short, powerful arms with long clawed hands. And unlike monkeys, they walk upright. They have no tails. They're said to have lived in small parties and slept in caves and among the branches of trees.
Now, the Nittaewo are said to have been wiped out by the Vedas, the indigenous people of Sri Lanka, around 250 years ago. And get this, the Vedas trap them in a cave and seal it shut with fire and stone.
Phew, that is brutal. But it also raises some big questions, like who or what were the Nittaewo? Were they an offshoot of Homo erectus, local Bigfoot cousin, or, like with a lot of things, just a folklore gone wild?
So the earliest mention of them comes from the Vedas themselves, and they describe the Nittaewo as aggressive, disemboweling their prey with long claws or hooked nails,
Eesh.
allowing them to feed on the entrails.
What sounds like a toddler who got into a can of spray tan and a caffeine stash.
Yeah, that checks out.
Right?
Now, they also don't use tools. They were said that they didn't have a formal language or communication style.
Mm-hmm.
Basically they were a nocturnal pest, but we're not talking like a rat.
Uh-huh.
These things had the sharp claws and were known to attack livestock and even people.
Jesus. Well, here's the twist, right? The Vedas didn't just coexist with these creatures. They declared war on them. The final encounter, according to oral traditions, ended with them trapping a whole group of the Nittaewo in a cave and burning them alive. which, if you think about it, is very similar to the Lovelock Cave legends that we talked about in one of our previous episodes in the American Southwest.
Yeah, it's very similar. And now, like with this one, it's one of the few cryptid stories that with an supposed extinction date.
Oh,
So, like we had covered the Lovelock Cave, and it's a very similar story. But this one is said to happen around the late 1700s. But if you ask some of the locals, the Nittaewo never fully vanished.
okay. So let's enter the anthropologists. Some think the Nittaewo might have been surviving relatives of Homo floresiensis, however you pronounce it, those tiny human cousins from Indonesia. For those that are interested in small hominoid creatures, that would be like the orang pendek, or at least the base for the legend of the orang pendek in Indonesia, which we covered in a previous episode, I believe, episode 30 of Explorers Seekers of the Truth, which is available on YouTube, Facebook, and really any platform you get your podcasts. So go check that out.
Yeah. Yeah, this is basically the AKA the hobbits of the family tree.
Right.
If true, it would mean multiple pockets of primitive humanoids survived way longer than we had thought.
Right, and in total secrecy, no less. But skeptics say the Nittaewo were probably just misidentified animals, such as an undiscovered form of Sri Lankan gibbon. I believe it was William C. Osmond Hill, the primatologist, in which fits many of the identifiable characteristics, or a bear, which are known to walk bipedally and leave human-like footprints. Yet the only bear in Sri Lanka is the sloth bear, which is among the most quadrupedal of all bears and has black hair, not reddish, and it's an insectivore, or even exaggerated as like a tribal enemy.
Yeah, there's a theory that it was a small group of feral humans, like think about like outcasts that live a rougher lifestyle, that developed a reputation, bad hygiene, and just kind of that's where maybe some of it comes from. And
Right.
You're looking at South and Southeast Asia were subject to a great number of migrations, with each new group displacing the previous rulers. So you could definitely have this being another group of humans that they're identifying as a creature.
Very true. I mean, well, we mentioned before, orang pendek, the Homo floresiensis. I cannot pronounce that word, I swear to God. The Hobbit people that were just recently discovered. And then now you have the Nittaewo. So you have multiple branches of mini people, and then there's also the what was the one that we covered in Pennsylvania? They have an apple
The Alba
festival.
Witch.
Yeah. So there is another tiny creature in the United States. So here you have stories all around the world of tiny humanoid looking people. I mean, even the Moonite people, for example. So I mean, who knows? There's tons of different legends and lore of tiny humanoid creatures. And as we have learned in the past, sometimes those indigenous stories, folk tales, and stuff like that often end up being true. I mean, imagine telling your kids, don't go into the forest, or the hairy little red people with claws will snatch you,
Yeah, that's not a bedtime story. That's a warning shot. Like,
right.
That's not just don't go out there because they'll take you. It's do you remember what we found in the woods? Was the stomach ripped out? Yeah, well, that will be you.
Yeah, right. It was one of the little people. So British explorers in the early 20th century got wind of these legends and actually searched for the Nittaewo cave, but as luck would have it, they never found it.
Interestingly, though, what they did find were more stories, accounts of strange tracks, mutilated animals,
Mm.
and even eerie sounds in the jungle.
Well, and here's the kicker. As recently as the 1980s, some locals still claim to see these small upright hairy beings in the forest. So, not monkeys, something else.
So that really poses the question, are the Nittaewo extinct or just really good at playing hide and seek?
Mhm.
Because there was a surge of sightings in 2019. The problem with these sightings is they don't really fit the Veda's descriptions,
Mhm.
leading to the possibility that it is just a hoax fraud story now,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the modern sightings.
Right, right. Well, if the Nittaewo were real, and I'm not saying they weren't, it means our understanding of human history might need to be rewritten.
Well, yeah, I think we've covered that in different episodes, especially with like the unknown history of
Mhm.
humanity. It's really something where we have the basic answer and
Right.
not necessarily the truth. It's just a basic, like, oh, if you follow evolution, these are the steps, and this is what came from this, and this is what came from that, and what came from
Right.
that. But there's a lot of periods in those phases where there's branches. There's
Mhm.
a small population like Homo florensas and stuff like that, where you have they're in that area of the world, and all of a sudden they get smaller and smaller and smaller till they're their own subset
Yeah.
of creature. So
Well,
and you also got to look at like island dwarfism and stuff like that. Now that doesn't play depending on how old the Nittaewo would be, like genetically,
yeah.
because a lot of these areas were you drop sea level 120 feet, and a lot of these areas are actually connected to each other. Malaysia and stuff like that
Right.
is actually more of a much larger landmass.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I guess to your point, the sea levels will come back up. They get stranded and they're stuck in these little tiny islands.
mhm. Well, that's the like insular dwarfism or whatever it is,
Yeah. Yep.
the island dwarfism.
Mhm.
They found those dinosaurs off the coast of California on one of the Channel Islands or whatever. The skeleton, not they didn't find dinosaurs, they found fossils.
Right. Right.
But they were much smaller than the mainland versions
Mhm.
of the same dinosaur. So
Right.
you had a T-Rex, but here the T-Rex was you know full size on the mainland, and all of a sudden you go to the islands and they're finding them where they're half the size. So
Well,
you
even
get
like you said before with elephants and stuff like that, there were the dwarf elephants on
Mhm.
these tiny islands, so
Yep.
which would be awesome to see. But it also kind of goes back to I think it was it the Ancient Civilizations show that we did a while back where you're talking about how our species is like the species with amnesia, and there was like
Mhm.
according to that one calendar, I can't remember the name of the person, but apparently there was like 100-year or 300-year span that is just like missing.
That's the whole theory where they claim that the Middle Ages isn't real.
Mhm.
Um, I would say it's probably the Middle Ages are real, but we are a lot older than
What we think.
what we think or what we're told. So you have all this time frame where cultures build up, and if you're on an island, you don't need to be as big.
Mhm.
You're also on an island, and again, this has a lot to do with migrations to these islands. If you're not interacting with other civilizations, other Indo-Aryan language groups, you're going to eventually lose those skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, especially primitive language, you don't have the amount of vocabulary like we have nowadays, where one word might have meant 4 different things, just depending on how hard you said the first letter, or the last letter may dictate what you were going after.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of different ways you could look at this, but I would agree with with you that these things still may possibly exist, and I think it's just an offshoot of some sort of our ancient family tree. But I think the lesson of the day really is don't start forest beef with tiny cryptids, or you'll end up disemboweled.
Yeah, I mean, if they're out there, maybe just let them be, because last time somebody messed with them, they got cave sealing treatment, where we had to force them into a cave and then light the cave entrance on fire and block it up. So
that's true. Well, weren't the hobbits, the Floresiensis people, they were found in caves. All their remains were found in caves.
That I'm not sure of, but
yeah, because remember they were in this cave system, and they found these remains of tiny people, and they thought they were kids that had fallen in or were drug in by scavenging mammals and stuff like that. And then they found that it was like a whole family system of these tiny people, and they were full-grown people, and they were in caves.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely, if you think about a cave for a primitive group of people, is going to be one of the best places to live. You're protected from the elements,
especially small ones.
Yeah,
you can get into tinier caves and whatnot.
And also,
now, do you think this is kind of going way off? Do you think it could possibly be banishing of, like, maybe not necessarily dwarves, but if they were runts of these primitive ancestors of ours, and maybe they felt they couldn't survive, or they couldn't keep up, or whatever, and they just banished these runts, for lack of better terms, like these, you know what I mean? These
the smaller,
smaller of the people at the time. So they would banish them off to these islands, and they were thriving. And then because they were all smaller to begin with, they just basically had an island of dwarven people.
I mean, it could be. It's a toss up there, because I mean, is it a separate branch of the human lineage? Is it a group of island based dwarfism? Because they don't need to be as big. There's not as many natural predators for a low end advanced humanity. So yeah, I mean, it also could just be where, like, at a certain point they sent a group of smaller tribesmen to this island, and whatever the original group was got lost to time. They thrived on the island. Like I said, it's not a very big vocabulary most of the early Indo-Aryan languages had, so you lose the use of vocabulary, and then all of a sudden you have primitive, rough, here, go back to the episode where we talked about the those Native Americans in Texas that they said were the most primitive. Even for the Native Americans of the time, said they were super primitive people. Now they're in Texas. It's a much larger area, bigger environment, bigger predators. They were said to be super big, but super primitive.
Right.
Here, you don't have as many predators or large predators. They get smaller because of the land that they have to occupy, the food supplies and all that. They got smaller. and it's just another, primitive native group that could be what we see as Bigfoot or Sasquatch or, the Rang Pendek.
True. Or for all we know, it could have been the Vedas. They were, you know what I mean? The Vedas were the ones shipping their unwanted tiny, whatever you want to call it, defects, for lack of better terms. And they were just saying, as a form of superstition, because they don't want to believe that it was one of them, because a lot of these tribes, are very superstitious. So they say, oh, well, they are these tiny people that we're at war with them. They're going to curse us or whatever. So we got to banish them off and burn them up in a cave because they were really just the unwanted
Could
defects.
be.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. It makes you
definitely.
think.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Well, we will be back next time with another episode from the shadowy corners of the world. Until then, stay curious and enjoy the dead air.
And stay weird. Good night, everybody.
Good night.